You see someone across the fire. Your chest tightens. Your palms go dry. Something ancient inside you stirs, something older than language, older than cities, older than anything you would call civilization. That feeling you just recognized? It has been running in your body for roughly 300,000 years, but here is what nobody tells you. The way your ancestors found a mate looks almost nothing like what you do today. No apps. No first dates. No awkward text messages left unread. What they had instead was something far stranger, far more brutal, and in some ways far more honest than anything the modern world has invented. So how did ancient humans actually find a mate? The answer will surprise you. Let us start with the basics. For most of human prehistory, you did not choose a partner from a sea of strangers. You chose from a very small world. The average hunter-gatherer band, the basic social unit your ancestors lived in for hundreds of thousands of years, contained somewhere between 20 and 50 people. That is it. That is your entire dating pool. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, famous for his research on the social brain, found that these band sizes were not random. They were constrained by cognitive limits, specifically, how many relationships a primate brain can meaningfully track. Your ancestors were not scrolling through hundreds of profiles. They were navigating roughly a dozen adults of the right age and sex. All of whom they had known since birth, so scarcity was the first rule of ancient mating. And scarcity changes everything. When your world is that small, reputation is everything. You could not fake it. You could not present a curated version of yourself to someone who had watched you panic during a storm, cry after a failed hunt, or sulk when you did not get your share of meat. Everyone already knew who you were. This is something anthropologist Christopher Bohm documented in his research on hunter-gatherer social dynamics, the group's enforced fierce leveling mechanisms. Anyone who tried to dominate, boast, or manipulate was swiftly brought back down by the group. Arrogance was not attractive. Competence was. Generosity was. Reliability was. Think about that for a second. The traits your ancestors were evaluated on were traits you actually had to live every day. There was no performance. Just a long, slow, collective observation, but reputation alone did not seal the deal. Physical display mattered enormously, and in ways more public than you might expect. Archaeologist April Noel and others studying Upper Paleolithic cultures, roughly 40,000 to 10,000 years ago, have documented extensive evidence of body ornamentation. Shell beads. Red ochre pigment applied to skin and hair. Feathers. Carefully shaped bone pendants. Found at sites like Blombos Cave in South Africa, some of these ornaments date back over 100,000 years. Your ancestors were dressing to impress long before anyone invented a mirror. What did this signify? Evolutionary biologists call it honest signaling. An ornament made from rare shells gathered from a distant coast told a potential mate something real: this person has the skills, the connections, or the status to access rare materials. It was not vanity. It was a resume. And then there was music. Bone flutes discovered at Hohle Fels Cave in Germany date to at least 40,000 years ago, among the oldest confirmed musical instruments ever found. Researchers like Nicholas Conard at the University of Tübingen argue that music served a direct social bonding function in early human groups. Dancing, drumming, and singing around the fire were not just entertainment. They were displays. They were tests. They were invitations. So let us reconstruct a scene. Picture your ancestor, call her a young woman in her late teens, living in a band of 35 people somewhere on the East African savanna about 80,000 years ago. She has watched the young men in her group for years. She knows who flinches in a crisis and who does not. She knows who shares their food without being pressured and who hoards. She knows who makes the others laugh, who tells the best stories, who can read the weather or track an animal for 6 hours without losing focus. She has not been on a date. She has been running a years-long observation study, one evening in neighboring band camps nearby for a seasonal gathering. These intergroup meetings were critical. they served as the ancient equivalent of a social network, spreading genes, tools, ideas, and alliances across the landscape. Suddenly her options expand. There are new faces. New ornaments. New performances around a shared fire. Anthropologist Polly Wiessner, who spent decades studying the Jew/Hoansi San people of the Kalahari, documented that these intergroup gatherings were among the primary contexts for mate selection in small-scale societies. They were also moments of extraordinary cultural exchange, stories, dances, and technologies passed between groups, so there she is, watching. And someone is watching her back. Here is where it gets more complicated. In many ancient societies, the decision of who mated with whom was not entirely hers to make alone. Kinship alliances mattered. If two bands were strategically useful to each other, sharing territory, resources, or defensive cooperation, families might arrange or strongly encourage matches between their young. This was not coercion in the modern sense. It was politics. Your body was partly a diplomatic instrument. Anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss argued in his foundational work on kinship structures that the exchange of mates between groups was one of the earliest and most universal forms of social contract in human history, but individual preference was never fully erased. Evidence from studies of contemporary forager societies, and from the evolutionary record itself, strongly suggests that female choice in particular has been a powerful selective force in human evolution. Geoffrey Miller, an evolutionary psychologist at the University of New Mexico, has argued extensively that many of our most distinctly human traits, creativity, humor, language complexity, moral reasoning, evolved at least partly because they were attractive to potential mates. Your brain, in other words, may partly be a courtship display, and that raises a remarkable question. If intelligence, storytelling, empathy, and wit were the currencies of ancient attraction, what does that say about who survived to become your ancestors? Now comes the twist. You might assume that ancient mating was a freer, more natural process than the complicated rituals of modern life. But in many ways it was more constrained, not less. You could not leave your band without enormous risk. You could not simply walk away from a bad match without community consequences. Marriage-like pair bonds, documented universally across hunter-gatherer cultures by anthropologist Helen Fisher and others, were not just romantic arrangements. They were economic ones. Raising a human child requires years of investment. A partner was a survival partner first. Love, in the form we recognize it, may have come later, or grown slowly alongside practical need. What is undeniable is that the emotional machinery you use today to feel attraction, jealousy, longing, and love is the same machinery your ancestors used. The brain circuits that fire when you are drawn to someone, dopamine flooding your reward system, norepinephrine sharpening your focus, serotonin dropping to create obsessive thought, were calibrated in the conditions described above. Small bands. Long observation. Public display. Reputation. Honest signals. Rare, high-stakes meetings with outsiders, your body is still running that ancient program. Every time you feel your stomach drop when someone catches your eye, every time you try a little harder around someone you are drawn to. Every time you notice someone's generosity or humor or steadiness and feel something shift inside you, that is 300,000 years of selection pressure speaking, the fire is different now. The faces around it are strangers. The distances are unimaginable to your ancestors. But the chest tightening, the dry palms, the searching look across the room, that has not changed at all. You are still, in the most fundamental way, looking for someone you can trust with your life. You always have been.